Hello once again, it's Mr. Pete, your YouTube shop teacher. Welcome back to Studio G. And as I sit here before the 9-inch South Bend lathe, I'll tell you what I'm going to do in this two-part video. Well, some of you may have a South Bend lathe with a milling attachment, and there are certain limitations. Actually, there's a lot of limitations to it, but one of them is the amount of travel that you have. And this little offset attachment that I'm going to make will solve that problem. Now, granted, very few of you have one of these, and probably fewer have one of these offset attachments. If you do, leave a comment on that, because I had really never seen one in the flesh until I saw them in the South Bend catalog from 1956. So do not click off on this yet, because there are some interesting operations that I'm going to show in this video that may interest you and may help you in some of your other endeavors, even though probably only 2 people in the world will make this. For those of you that are not familiar with the milling attachment, I'll show you quickly how to mount it here. I've already loosened these 2 screws, and you might have to wiggle the compound to get it to come free. This will be the hardest part to make, so the first part of the video, or part 1, will be on this piece, which I call a round dovetail. It may not be the correct term, it's my term, so we'll set that aside. And then taking the milling attachment, and they made these in 4 or 5 sizes. This is the smallest one. And as you can see, the dovetail will fit right into the hole here as such. And then there are 2 bolts here used to hold it down, and we would tighten these as well. I'm not going to do that right now, but as you can see, this can be moved into different positions. There's a little protractor here. It can also be tilted right here at various angles. I'm not going to do that either. And then there's a slide here. This is the slide on dovetails as well, and we can feed up and down. So it is kind of a handy attachment. It's not meant to fully replace a milling machine. It just is not that versatile and is not that heavy duty, but we're going to go ahead and plug away with this video anyway. Let's have a safety tip here. I've already mounted a 3/8 end mill in here, because I'll be doing a little milling in part 2. Not much, just enough to show you what this thing will do. But an end mill like this, even though the machine is not running, is incredibly dangerous. They're sharp. The worst injury I ever had in my entire life was running my arm across that on the Bridgeport mill. And there's not much left of the scar there, but it was deep enough to where I almost went to the doctor. Almost. So put a piece of tape or something over that to protect that, because I tell you, your flesh is going to find that sharp edge. This is a piece of 7/8 square stock, and let's just pretend that I was going to mill this off square. Now watch what happens here. As I back the cross slide out like this, if I was cutting, all of a sudden it comes to an abrupt stop. I have run out of travel. As you can see right here, we're out of travel. So it's limited in what it can do, and that is the purpose of this offset attachment, is to give me another 1.5 inches of travel in this direction, which should increase its usefulness greatly. This is a copy of the 1952 South Bend General Catalog. So here it is on page 59 of that catalog. The offset base looks simple enough, but there are some pretty tricky operations, and I advise you to go ahead and pause your video and read this description, although I will put stills of this at the end of the video for your enjoyment. Let's get started here. As I often do, as it is my wont to do, I often make a prototype. I have no drawings. There will be no drawings, but let's take the attachment off here real quickly. And here is the mock-up. Made out of 1/2-inch wood with 1 3/8 holes. That's the diameter of that round dovetail. And then I also made a plug here, actually 2 of them. That's why it takes so long to make videos. You know, I do rehearsals and make senseless parts, I suppose. But that's my plug gauge. I wanted to know the exact diameter. And here's a piece of nylon or Delron, whatever it is. And of course this would be fastened onto this, but putting this down and that, I would then put the attachment on there. Of course we got holes to drill and all that, but as you can see here, that gives me the extra travel that I need. Now in the catalog it says that there is a 1 1/2-inch distance between the centers of these 2 holes. So it gives me 1 1/2-inch more travel, and then we run out of travel right here, of course, on the cross slide. Let's have a little sidebar here. As you know, this nice South Bend 9-inch lathe came to me courtesy of John Collings from down in Florida, and this is the compound. Notice how perfect this is. There's not a nick on it, as compared to one that came from a school where, and this is typical, where the chuck jaws chewed up the corner of the cross slide here, and then of course they tightened her down here. Baby Huey tightened her down so much that broke off, and then they couldn't get it out, so they pounded it out without removing these little screws. So bad things happen to good machines. I'm sure you figured this out already, but this will be made in 2 pieces. And I also made a test piece here to see how I was actually going to construct this. And this will be in part 1. I'm going to make this right now. We're going down into the basement shop here for the duration. And then this will be in part 2, made out of 1/2-inch thick steel. Much easier, but yet we got some critical dimensions on here. So let's get started with the round dovetail. If you like my videos, tell your friends. If you do not like my videos, don't tell anyone. Okay, we're down in Studio B. So again, I'll be making this part out of this piece of steel in part 2. So we'll set that aside for now. It is not up for discussion. Again, I'm going to make this part right now. So copying off of this, I have taken dimensions, and the most important dimension here is what is the angle of this dovetail, and it's a hard one to measure. So I'm using this little protractor, which is only semi-accurate, and I deduced that it's around 30 degrees, so using a fishtail here, one can see that it is. So that is established. Now I put just a little bit of a parallel in there so you can truly see what I'm doing. Now I mic'd all 3 of these round dovetails, and they vary just a little bit in size, but that doesn't matter. We'll just take the average, and this particular one, which has to fit in to this, is 1.375. Oh, that's 1 3/8. By the way, that's not the same diameter as Atlas uses, and they do everything backwards. Their dovetail is, well, you know what I mean. And I wasted 15 minutes out of my life making this plug, which is the same diameter. And how long does this plug need to be? Well, with this inserted, and that's not exactly 1/2 inch, but close enough for discussion purposes here. So it's just a little bit over 1 inch, so I'm going to call it about 1 inch and 50 thousandths to start with, and it can always be trimmed. You know, I always make things longer, but that's 1.015. I spent a lot of time thinking about how I'm going to make this 30-degree angle That's what keeps me up at night, as if I do not have enough insomnia. Okay, so sometimes I crack myself up. So how am I going to do that? Well, I finally decided, and I practiced, I rehearsed. This is the tool that I made and I'm going to use. Can you see that? How nicely that fits in there? Now, at the end of this video, I will have about a 1-minute clip on how I ground this, how I made this. It's 5/16 square high-speed steel, exceptionally easy to make, so I won't spend a lot of time on it, plus nobody's going to do this. I must have 3 or 4 tons of steel in my shop, but it's not all in one spot. Some's in the garage, some's here, some's there. But anyway, why couldn't I find a piece of 1 3/8? That's not that rare, but I wasted over a half hour looking for that. But finally, I've got all kinds of 1.5" stock, so that's what I'm going to use. And here is another sample I made. It was already drilled out. That has nothing to do with it. That's the first one I made. And so when you're making something like that, my point here is that you might have to practice. That could be done with Delron as well to speed things up. Let's go on over to the closing lathe, but this is the piece that I'm going to use. I think I'll go ahead and face that off camera, and then the first thing I have to do is to turn it down to the right diameter like I did right here. Okay, I'm going to turn it down to 1 3/8, maybe 1/1000th or 2 under, 1.25" long. Never grab one of those long stringy chips with your bare hands while the machine is running. It could grab and just pull your fingertip right off. Here is my method of safely removing chips. I use this magnet that I got at some kind of bargain store, and it'll pick up those long stringy things and you can put them right into the dustbin without cutting your fingers. I just took a hair off on that last pass, and there it is down to final size, just a few thousandths under, so I do not have to struggle with it. I already told you that the tool is mounted in the holder here, and it's 30 degrees, and it is perfectly parallel with the holder. Now, if you have your tool, the lowest tool post, slightly off, a degree or off, your angle is off. So I like to set it by taking a parallel, holding it like that, and then tighten this down. Now you could indicate it, but that would be overkill. But now I know that my 30-degree tool is set properly to make that dovetail. Now from our what it's worth department, let's give you a couple more dimensions here. The length right there is 1/2 inch. And the flat here is 1/8 of an inch. Okay, I'm not really sure what alloy this is, but it's just cold rolled steel as far as I know. Now, this is what I call a form tool, so just plunge cutting is problematic. It will chatter on you, especially if you have a harder alloy. That's why I mentioned that you get some decent machining alloy. Do not use aluminum. But I'm not just going to plunge in there. I got to worry and work away some of that material. I could even go in there and rough it out a little bit with a cutoff tool, but I've already done a couple of these, so I'm not going to do that, and I won't show all of this because this is actually going to take about 15 minutes in real time. 400 RPM. And there it is. Worked pretty well. I'll knock the corners off here with a file, and I'm ready to cut it to length. Now, absolutely do not remove your work between the operations here, or you will lose your concentricity. Just a little bit of chatter marks in there, but not bad. So this is a pretty good method of doing it, as you can see. I won't show it, but I'll be back in a few minutes here after I cut this off on the bandsaw, and then I'm going to face it to length. Okay, it's cut off, you know, and I've been guilty over the years of cutting things too long and then having too much to machine down, but you've heard the old saying, I cut it twice and it's still too short. So I'll mark it off here and then onto the lathe. I'm not sure I told you yet in this video to be sure and wear your safety glasses in your shop. So let's put the work in there. It's already marked. And I'll just machine it down to the layout line. Well, here it is. This is the end of part 1. Be sure and watch part 2 when available. From this rusty hulk of cold roll steel to the round dovetail, which will fit into the other part. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, give me a thumbs up and watch some of my 1,300 other videos. And I'll see you next time. Remember to work safely in your machine shop. Take care. Okay, this is the extra credit as promised earlier in the video. First of all, before I take it out of the holder, notice that this holder has a little V-groove, which can sometimes be an inconvenience. So what I did here is I took a 1/4 inch tool bit and just used it as a parallel so that I could straddle that, and yet the tool would remain parallel to the tool holder. So let's take it out real quick. And it's just a piece of 5/16 high-speed steel. And it's been ground. I said 30 degrees, but according to the protractor, it's 60 degrees. So now, it would benefit by a little side clearance here, but I didn't use it, and it worked perfectly well. And there is 10 degrees, approximately, end clearance on it. Not too critical. And what did I do with this again? Produce this. Let's step over to the belt sander. I did this on the belt sander. Of course, you could do it on a grinder. I'm at the 6-inch Rockwell Delta belt sander, which I've had since the beginning of time. The table is already tilted here to 10 degrees to produce that end clearance, as I told you. And the miter gauge is set for 60 degrees using this protractor, but you can see it's 60 by comparing it with the other protractor. And with the miter gauge here, it doesn't quite reach far enough here for a short piece, so I just clamped a piece of scrap stock on there, and I ground it in this manner, back and forth, keeping it cool. It's very hard steel. That's about 10 minutes worth of grinding. And that's all there is to it. And it really turned out nice, actually. So I just put it up against like that. Don't burn your fingers, don't trim your fingernails. And back and forth, and this belt is not even all that sharp, and it did a magnificent job. End of extra credit. Here is a video tip for aspiring YouTube video makers who often film in the dark. Notice here how you can't even begin to see this. We got a bright here, and it's all about contrast. So take this away and watch how this lightens up. so you can see it better, but you know, it's still not great because this is kind of bright. Did you even see that pick up a little bit? But I want you to see clearly what I'm doing here, so I'm adding light now. Now watch as the light comes in, how you can actually start to see some of the details. So use auxiliary lighting, and lots of it, and you might have to spend money on that, but do not film in the dark. Sorry for the criticism.